So recently there's been a lot of debate on who SP Silverwolf's best support actually is, and in my previous video I stated how I believe that Sparkle would likely be her best in slot alongside Sparksy. However, I got quite a few comments stating how instead of Sparkle, it actually may be Yao Guang instead. And well, people brought up a lot of good points, such as Sparksy's Trace 2 and Yao Guang's SP generation, Sparkle being a single target buffer in a dual DPS team, and I even heard Elation MC being thrown into the mix. So today, using the available information, I want to go over which support is best for SP Silverwolf. And was it a waste if you pulled Yao Guang and won Silverwolf and not Evanescia? Hopefully this clears up some confusion and will help you decide on how to plan your pulls. Now, it's possible that the 4.2 beta will release before Sparksy and Yao Guang's banners end, but since I'm not fully sure if that's the case, this video will focus on what we can determine right now. With that said, let's get right into it. Firstly, starting with what we know about SP Silverwolf or Evanescia, it's been stated that SP Silverwolf charges her ult when teammates gain punchline, but this doesn't count fixed punchline from someone like Yao Guang. Now, because of the wording, I'm not sure if it includes Silverwolf herself, but for now, I'll assume it does. Secondly, it was said that Evanescia's troll team consisted of Yao Guang, Elation MC, and Huohuo. From this, I deduced in my previous video that A. Silverwolf will not want Yao Guang in her team, B. Sparksy and Yao Guang will not be in the same team, C. Silverwolf either doesn't eat lots of SP or has her own SP mechanic, and D. Evanescia's team may be Elation skill focused while Silverwolf is punchline and SP related. Currently, I haven't seen anyone disagree with the third and fourth points, but rather the first two, so that's what I'm gonna cover. Now, before we figure out who would be better, we need to figure out what would be required to become the best support in a Silverwolf team. And this can be deduced because of Sparksy's pretty specific kit. Currently speaking, it's widely believed she will be Silverwolf's best in slot, who acts as a sub DPS. From this, we can gather that the support must be able to provide a lot of SP for the team to function, and if possible, buff the entire team as to enable a dual DPS comp with Silverwolf and Sparksy. With that in mind, I can now tackle the first group of points. Skill points. If skill points will be a key factor in determining who's the best, well, who actually makes more SP? A common point I've heard is that with Sparkle, we can't max out Sparksy's Trace 2, which when there's 3 Elation units, Sparksy's ult makes 3 extra thrill, or SP. And that's absolutely true. Assuming a Silverwolf, Sparksy, and Sparkle, we only get 1 thrill. So in this regard, we're basically losing 3 SP when not using Yao Guang at the moment. However, I'm looking at it from a longer perspective and believe that Elation will eventually get an Elation sustain down the line. That way we can max out Sparksy's Trace 2 and everything synergizes. But of course, there's a chance that Yao Guang just fits the team better. But for now, all we can do is just compare the SP generation. The argument I've heard so far is that Yao Guang rivals Sparkle in terms of SP and also makes more than enough SP alone. So let's find out if that's actually the case. For this, I want to look at a 500 AV scenario, which rivals an anomaly arbitration clear. There's only Sparksy and the support. No starting energy, extra energy from supports like Huohuo, or enemy hitting them. So a Yao Guang with 3 Elation allies will make 11 SP in total, which is pretty good. However, a Sparkle who can consistently 2-turn ult will generate 24 SP in total. Now, by themselves there is a clear winner, but that's in a vacuum and not including Sparksy. So adding in a 110 Sparksy, we're only getting 1 ult in 500 AV as she has a 4-turn ult rotation. Now, in practice, a 160 speed Sparkled would be pulling up Sparksy, so Sparksy would get 3 extra turns and thus 1 more ult. But for this, I'm not calculating that. So with all of that and now adding in AHA, Yao Guang will now make a total of 20 SP, while Sparkle's 2 Elation team makes 24. So, like some people have said, it's actually pretty comparable. Now, if there was an Elation sustain, then Sparkle actually jumps to 29 total SP, so nearly giving 50% more SP than Yao Guang. With this information, I would say that if you're planning for SP Silverwolf, both Yao Guang and Sparkle both seem viable in terms of SP. Sparkle still comes out ahead in raw SP generation, but the gap is smaller once Sparksy is factored in. Looking long term though, I'd say it's currently in favor of Sparkle. Moving on to the next point, I've seen a lot of people bring up how the buffs work, specifically arguing that Sparkle would obviously be much worse as she's a single target focused support in what's likely a dual DPS team. On paper, this makes a lot of sense. However, in practice, no. Sparkle can actually buff both DPSs at once and still maintain 100% uptime. You just need to alternate the skill. Now, this interaction became possible post Nova Flare since her buffs now last 2 entire turns, which honestly is so cool. Traditionally, Sparkle's played as a 160 speed action advancer which pulls up slow DPSs, but post Nova Flare, she's now able to be a dual DPS support, and in practice, functions similarly to units like Ruamei or Tribi. Now, the main difference is that there is a slight window of downtime, which follow-up attacks may not be able to utilize. That said, the trade-off is that you get some of the highest buffs in the game. Now, there are 2 minor caveats. Firstly, unwanted action events can ruin your setup if your DPS goes too often. For example, the Herta ult or Lygus' pull. And secondly, you can't always ult as there is minor downtime in between. But besides that, fully functioning dual DPS support with a lot of amp. So for those bringing up Sparkle being single target only as a major downside, I don't think that's actually true. Though I will say you will have to play around the speed tune with this. Now moving on, before we even compare the actual buff values, I want to briefly address whether dual buffs even matter in the first place. And it just comes down to this. If Silverwolf is dealing a majority of the damage, then a single target buffer is just fine, and Sparksy is now just a punchline bot. So think like Anaxa to Herta. However, if the damage is evenly distributed, then we'd of course prefer someone who can buff both, so like a Tribi to Evernight to a Castris. But again, that doesn't matter too much as both supports currently can support both DPSs. Moving on, let's now compare the actual buff numbers, as who doesn't like seeing numbers? To set up the scenario, it'll be base kit supports with no Lycons and relics for simplicity's sake, and it'll also just be one single Elation hit. Sparksy will have 24 useful substats, which I believe is standard for calculations. So her base stats will look something like this. As you can see, with attack boots, we actually easily cap out her trace 1. So if you plan on running Sparkle or Huohuo, please consider speed boots. But for my test, Sparkle's attack percent will be completely useless as both supports are capped out on Elation. So starting with a built Yao Guang who provides these buffs, a Sparksy with 70 punchline would get a 73.2% damage increase. Now moving to a Sparkle who gives these stats, a 50 punchline Sparksy would get 87.5% damage increase. To add additional context, I've also listed a few other punchline values for Sparkle, which we can see that in this case, a Yao Guang who has 30 more punchline would be amping equal to how much a Sparkle would. A disclaimer though, while this is generally how the buffs would go, it highly depends on your build, other supports, and also the game scenario. If you don't have a good build and have low crit damage, then Sparkle would perform even better, and vice versa if you do have a lot. If a future sustain gives Elation specific amps, then it will diminish Yao Guang's value in comparison. And also, because punchline fluctuates in combat, it of course will just depend. But to have a decent comparison, I'm just gonna use my snapshot scenario. And with that, I would come to the conclusion that Sparkle not only gives more SP, but would also generally outbuff Yao Guang, a dedicated Elation support. Keep in mind, we're still missing 45% attack when using Sparkle. But what that actually allows us to do is to actually run speed boots, which can increase AHA speed and potentially our damage as well. However, this is just raw amp, and only really tells part of the story. Yao Guang still does have a fighting chance. But before continuing, I want to rapid fire some other important points that I saw in my comments. First, Sparksy currently runs out of certified banger without Yao Guang, and especially because of Sparkle's advances. And I say not really. For this to happen, Sparksy needs to act 3 times before Aha acts once. That way there's 2 enhanced attacks and 1 without, which is a big damage loss. Right now though, Sparksy generally acts either once or twice before Aha depending on your team. Now after you get the second enhanced basic out, yes, you do run out Certified Banger. But it actually doesn't matter as Sparksy is not going to attack anytime soon, with Aha's turn coming right up to refresh. But now, action events such as Lygus, which is generally great for DPSs, become unwanted and actually bad for Sparksy. And in this case, Yao Guang's ability to extend Certified Banger is actually really useful. Next, Aha speed is slower because there's less Elation allies when using Sparkle. And of course, that's pretty true. At the moment, that's likely around 8 to 13ish speed when moving to 2 to 3 Elation units. So this can be important for Zero Cycle specifically, and sometimes, like what we saw earlier, we can get an additional Aha in a long rotation, which of course is more damage. But if you don't hit any breakpoints, then it literally makes zero difference. Now personally, I don't see these as the biggest concerns overall, but they are important factors that you'll need to consider if you decide to not use Yao Guang. Speaking of Yao Guang, we can finally talk about her as it's actually not all doom and gloom. As established earlier, Sparkle would provide more SP and also outbuff. However, that's not where Yao Guang's strength lies. Yao Guang instead helps in other ways which would actually even the scales. So going from most to least important, firstly, it's the fact that she makes extra Elation skills. For every Elation skill triggered, someone like Sparksy would be dealing roughly 1 to 2 million damage per Elation skill, which adds up pretty quickly. So while Sparkle may outbuff on paper, Yao Guang actually outdamages through additional nukes alone. Earlier, I mentioned that in a 500 AV scenario, Sparkle could potentially grant around 3 extra actions for the DPS. However, with my proposed double pull setup, I'm assuming you're not getting more than 2 actions if you are getting any at all. Finally, Yao Guang does meaningful personal damage, which Sparkle can't do. For reference, in a team of Sparksy, Sparkle, and Huohuo, an E0S0 Yao Guang, according to Camaradarius calcs, is doing a bit more than double of what Memories of the Past Trippy can do in that slot. Now, Trippy quite literally has 0 buffs and synergy in that team, but even so, Yao Guang is dealing 17.6% of the team's damage, which is actually really solid for support. With all these points in mind, I think we have enough information to come to a conclusion on whether or not Yao Guang would be good in a Silverwolf team. And the answer is, most likely yes. Sparkle provides more SP and stronger raw buffs, while Yao Guang provides extra Elation skills, deals nice personal damage, and you now don't need to worry about Certified Banger anymore. When it comes to punchline, I'd say it's actually pretty even. Sparkle makes more SP for Sparksy to convert into punchline, while Yao Guang makes that punchline herself due to her kit. So what would determine on who's better for Silverwolf? It'll actually just come down to what Silverwolf wants. If Silverwolf prefers SP and raw amps, then Sparkle is likely the best in slot. However, if Elation skills are vital, then Yao Guang would of course be the better pick. There's actually quite a bit of nuance to it, which I think is pretty nice. Moving on to my final thoughts for Yao Guang, I would say I do believe Yao Guang would be viable if not also excel in a Silverwolf team, and thus likely being good for both Elation main pushes. As such, it also seems like Sparksy and Yao Guang could be on the same team. So my bad for a part in my previous video. So for those who are worried about pulling Yao Guang and it not working with Silverwolf, I hope this video helps. Now previously, I also said that fixed punchline not counting for Silverwolf meant you couldn't play Yao Guang and Silverwolf together. But after seeing the feedback and making this video, I'd agree that it's much more likely that it's a balanced choice and doesn't mean that they're incompatible. So for final teams, I bet it looks something like this. Now we'll just have to wait for the Elation Sustained, which I saw many people hoping Pearl would be. Now, as the video has gone for quite a while, I'm gonna shorten up these next 2 sections which I thought were still pretty important. Firstly, there's currently not too good synergy between Yao Guang's talent and Sparksy. the talent rewards multiple skill instances rather than SP consumed. So currently, an Archer or even a Noxa uses this talent better than Sparksy. So this could either mean A, this is a balancing decision and perhaps Silverwolf would be an Archer style DPS, or B, she's meant for Evanescia. As for my final point, Elation MC. Currently we have zero info, but some people have been saying that they take Sparkle or Yao Guang spot. Now what we do have info on is this disgusting hurdle icon, and not the good kind either. It's an Elation icon meant for a single target focused Elation support. Now, it's currently unusable with our current Elation units, and likely wouldn't fit our main DPSs. So the most logical user would be Elation MC. Clearly, it's probably not meant for a dual DPS comp with Silverwolf and Sparksy. So, probably part of Evanescia's crew. Thus, this may suggest that Evanescia may be a hyper carry. And yeah, that's the whole video. I hope you enjoyed it or found it useful. I think I did a pretty good job with the evidence and my reasonings, but feel free to disagree. If you liked the work I did, a like or sub would be very nice. Also, thank you guys so much for the support on my previous video. It's probably my best performing video ever. But besides that, thank you guys so much for watching and peace.